This show had the feeling of like Hadoop Summit in years like maybe 3 or 4, where it was getting big enough and then even a little too big for a hotel, and you could feel like it might jump to Javits next year.
You're listening to It's About Data, episode 61. This time, Tony and I are joined by Andrew Brust to discuss MCP Dev Summit.
Hey, Andrew. Good to see you again. I'm sorry we missed each other at MCP Summit. I think we were kind of like definitely like ships passing through the day. You were on day one. We were on day two. But anyway, you wrote a very extensive LinkedIn post which kind of explained what we missed. We had some great discussions, with the folks at the Linux Foundation. But I think from you we can get kind of a perspective more from like the man on the street. And so kind of outline some of your I mean, there was just a lot of energy, in
was.
in your stand, and kind of give us your impressions about what you took in that day.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, man on the street is kind of funny, given that right outside there is you're in the middle of Times Square, and it's kind of rough. So hopefully my analysis is a tad more refined than the singing cowboys. But um, be, beyond that, this show had the feeling of like Hadoop Summit in years like maybe 3 or 4, where it was getting big enough and then even a little too big for a hotel, and you could feel like it might jump to Javits next year. Um, I think we got over critical mass, and that's actually a good allegory for a lot of the content, because it felt like MCP was really growing up, and that the speakers, both in the keynotes and the breakouts that I attended, I think I went to 4 of them, um, we're really starting to deal with like version 2 and version 3 ideas. And I was super reassured to see that folks were starting to talk about the hard problems, including governance, which I think I was ranting about the last time I was with you.
Yes.
um, so people now are conscientious around that. I don't think the problem's solved, but problems don't get solved immediately. What's important is that people prioritize, coming up with the solutions. And I was seeing speakers like Matt Alazar from Arcade talk about like full agentic frameworks and control planes, that where those terms were not hyperbolic but actually seemed well crafted, well used, and descriptive of what his company was building. Salazar is what I should have said. I'm not sure that's what I did say, but they're doing some really impressive stuff. And you heard from all these companies. I even took a look at some of the content on the second day that I missed. And you were really hearing from big companies like JP Morgan Chase and Morgan Stanley. So both Morgans. AstraZeneca was there, eBay was there, and they're talking about issues of how to scale MCP, of how to build control planes, and even in eBay's case, I guess, around running it on large Kubernetes clusters. So we're getting past the point of here's a demo that basically shows I can connect my agent to this particular SaaS application or what have you, or here's an MCP server that exposes these particular capabilities of my application as tools, right? And you're getting down to the harder parts of what's actually going to make this thing work in production in an enterprise. I don't think we're there yet, but I did see lots of people talking about what is needed. And that, by the way, included a really good talk on taking MCP and making it work in edge deployments, especially using it with small language models, because on the edge that's kind of necessary. And those SLMs have much smaller context windows than the large language models that are hosted in the cloud. So some of the protocols that are used, like JSON, gets very verbose. It can be a lot better to use something like Protobuf, and that was in that session. And man, getting down to those particular brass tacks, I thought was really impressive. That speaker, by the way, was Kierra Dotson, and she did a fantastic talk.
Interesting. I mean, the pace of adoption of MCP. Now, when I say adoption, I'm kind of using the term loosely, right? Because I
Yeah,
think all the enterprises are talking about using it. They're probably using it experimentally almost across the board.
I
But
think
as
it's
far as like hardened enterprise deployments, it's still really tough. And this came out, it was almost like a hacker's tool. It was the kind of thing where it's like, well, there are no controls on this thing. Now we're finally putting the controls in. What else has to happen for this to actually be like a fully reliable enterprise deployed tool that goes into like core data pipelines and processes that have to be secure?
totally. I really think this was, I don't know. MCP is in many ways an MVP, right? Like it gets you the
Yeah.
connectivity. It allows you to do things end to end, but it wasn't necessarily built for major kind of bulletproof operation. And so,
That kind of makes sense though if you think about it, because when you look at what's successful with standards, is that they lay the lowest common denominator, and my sense is things like security. I think we may find ourselves MCP may have basically, they may develop, I think, maybe some protocols for exchanging, let's say, authorizations. But I can't imagine that this as a standard will be successful if it tries to do everything.
it shouldn't try to do everything, but it should definitely be resilient at the stuff that it does do.
Right.
And it's going to do more. You had lots of people doing talks on what would be there in the next versions, and some of that was about creating kind of greater rigor in current capabilities, but some of it also was in adding new capabilities. But man, you just see the whole ecosystem really uh, rallying around MCP. I mean, I attended a session on the adoption of MCP inside of Jupyter notebooks from someone on the Jupyter project. And that's neat because that goes all the way back to 3 years ago. AI before we got all excited about the generative side of it when we were still in the realm of machine learning and so forth. So all the things that you can do with these agentic coding tools, let's say inside of a Visual Studio Code, you can start doing a lot of that inside of the Jupyter environment, including Jupyter Lab, and you can bring multiple ones into it. I was pretty impressed by what I saw. So certainly everybody's getting really geeky with this, and secondarily, and I think more importantly, you're hearing from real enterprise customers about the pain points they're having and what they're doing to address those pain points. And I think
Got
that's
it.
great.
I
And by
guess
the way,
another question. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, Kierra Dotson is from a company called Further, and she's the associate director of data science and AI strategy there. And she did such a good talk that I want to make sure I mention her. And also, I got to interview Manix Sertani, who's on the board of, who knew this, but there's a thing now called the Agentic AI Foundation, kind of
Mm.
a kind of a spinoff from the Linux Foundation, and
Yes.
Yep.
he's on the
Yep.
board of that. And they're thinking about lots of stuff like what comes next, also and beyond MCP. Right? This is for a full agentic ecosystem. MCP being part of that, but
Mhm.
MCP not being the end all be all.
Did you hear much talk about the A to A protocol that Google had introduced, or do these folks seem to be kind of like we need to leapfrog past that?
More the latter. I mean, I heard it kind of mentioned almost as a footnote once or twice.
Hmm.
But it did seem more like people were talking either about MCP and its enablement of interagent communication or moving a little bit laterally from there and just um, exposing skills, right? And
Yeah.
then creating the ability for skills to be kind of an open standard that is not necessarily dependent on MCP for that to work. And if different agents can expose their skills, then different agents can consume those skills in addition to offering them. But Tony, I don't think that story is fully baked yet. I mean, just
Right.
to answer your question head on, and that again, that's okay. We don't have to have categorical answers to everything immediately, but we do have to be asking the questions. And I really felt like with this show, those questions were getting asked instead of getting swept under the rug. And I thought that was excellent. I really saw us moving to the next level in the maturity model. And I do think the show is going to get bigger and bigger. And Linux
Hmm.
Foundation is also going to do a show in a few places, including San Jose in September, called Agent Con, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Well,
Um,
actually, I believe it's actually late October, and I think Matt and I are looking at heading out there because we were talking with the folks, and I think that's where we're going to bring like the PyTorch folks together, and it's going to be like a week of like about 3 or 4 different conferences in one to kind of bring it all together. But I really found really interesting your analogy before, your metaphor about this being like strata in the Hadoop world, circa 2014, or actually probably even earlier than that. 'Cause 2014 was, I think, was the peak, but I think it was like around like 2012, or when it
12
was
or
like
13, where first it
yeah,
was small, and then it was in the Hilton, and then I think it
yeah,
was in the Hilton and the Sheridan.
right,
All of this, you got to know the Manhattan geography to know this, but the Hilton is at 6th Avenue, the Sheridan's on the 7th Avenue side of the same block.
right.
They kept kind of outgrowing their space, and then it moved to Javits, and then, as you said, it kind of peaked and then it went away, which is too bad. But yes, this felt like the salad days, you know,
Yeah,
of a platform shift, and I thought that
it's a
was
really
that was
logical progression if you think about it, because basically a decade ago we were discovering frontiers in big data. Today we're looking at this is essentially data meets AI, and so it's really the next logical step. But Matt,
yeah.
what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of what I'm curious about, we've been hearing from vendors for a while about them adding their own proprietary like governance and access control layers. Like Teradata talked about this last year, have a lot of banking customers, and so that's just sine qua non, basically. But I think a lot of people have been doing this. My question is that going to be injected into the standard of MCP, or is that going to stay outside? If it stays outside, that creates some adoption headaches because that means that whatever platform you're on, it's hard to jump to a different platform because you move to a different proprietary set of controls, basically.
Mm,
I'll be curious to watch that, right?
And
How
and
broad
I
is the
think that's
standard going to be?
exactly why the AAIF has been established, is to put some governance over that so that the standards remain standards. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, exactly right. So that you don't have to, that means your platform shift cost becomes much lower if you can manage that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, put it this way: where standards work best is where basically it's something where like an individual vendor is not going to add value. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be only if like they're trying to control um, uh, their little mode. But with agents, these things go leap beyond modes. And it's the same thing I think would have with the open table formats, which is that the vendors realize, even Databricks realize, like it's just a table format. Um, and that there's a lot more to be gained by basically just getting access to all this data and putting your compute engine to it. I think my hope is that the same realization happens with agents, because by their very nature they're going to be connecting a whole bunch of different stuff.
Exactly. And they're also going to be doing it in non-ideal circumstances, right? A lot of the demos are based on having a persistent connection where things can be chatty, but the interactions are also pretty quick. But you definitely saw people talking about like long-running asynchronous tasks and durable workflows. And you also saw folks presenting on things like observability and the patterns around observability. All the nitty gritty stuff that maybe isn't so exciting at the beginning when something's just emerging. but again, people starting to talk about things that would really give MCP fit and finish. Uh, and yeah, MCP got so much enthusiasm so quickly, and its popularity evolved organically, but ungoverned organic growth eventually becomes unmanageable. So it's good that there's going to be some governance, and I think the double AIF is. I wish them well. It's good. There's a lot of cats that they are going to need to herd, but hopefully those cats will. The analogy is about to break down, but hopefully those cats will cooperate so they can keep
Well,
eating.
it all depends. Are they deterministic cats or non-deterministic?
All cats are
There's no such thing as a
non-deterministic.
deterministic cat. Dogs are more D for deterministic and D for dog, maybe, but not for cats.
So anyway, Andrew, really appreciate your being available so quickly after this. Again, this it was the timing itself was just on my end was just this personally was very frustrating because it
Hmm.
coincided with Passover. But I just thought this was significant. But on the other hand, I think my wife would have divorced me if I'd spent my time
Well,
in.
we tag teams. I was there Thursday, you were there Friday, so
No, I was only there, only parachuted into basically to have a chance to interview the Linux Foundation folks and the Agentic Foundation folks. So this actually really, I appreciate your stopping by because this really, as I said, this is a nice compliment to this. And I know Matt and I are certainly looking forward to finding the way to San Jose. Hopefully you'll join us and we can basically maybe try and make some sense of all this.
all right. That's all the way in the fall, though. I mean, everything could change by then.
That'll
Yeah,
be
yeah. Maybe they'll
true.
cancel it and have some new standard that replaces
That's
MCP.
right. That's right.
Let's
Maybe it'll
supposedly.
be CPM instead of MCP, right? What's old is new again.
That's good. Anyway, thanks for coming
All
by.
right. Thank you both.
Thank you.